Update 0810 introduced the branch of researchable Italian cruisers into World of Warships, and semi-armor piercing shells came with them. Discover all there is to know about the new ammunition type in this episode of How It Works.
Semi-armor piercing shells combine the features of high explosive and armor piercing shells. At the same caliber, they have better penetration capabilities than high explosive shells and deal damage that's comparable to armor piercing shells. They have excellent ricochet angles and can't over-penetrate.
Let's take a look at how the new shells work. Tier 10 Venezia loads her 15 guns with semi-armor piercing shells and waits for Minotaur to show her sight from behind an island some 3 kilometers away. Sounds like a certain frag, right? But instead, you get a dozen non-penetrations. Let's reload and shoot at Yamato, as she has turned a bow towards us. 12,012 damage. I'll explain why.
The rule of 14.3 calibers works for semi-armor piercing shells in the same way as for armor piercing ones. This means that the new shell penetrates armor that is 14.3 times thinner than the caliber of the gun that fired it at any angle. The ricochet check isn't performed at all.
If the armor is thicker, the angle at which a shell hits becomes important. An angle between 0 and 10 degrees always results in a ricochet. From 11 to 15 degrees, the probability of a ricochet reduces. Finally, a ricochet is impossible at angles from 16 to 90 degrees.
For comparison, the majority of armor-piercing shells in the game ricochet at angles starting from 30 degrees, and only at 46 degrees will there be no ricochet. However, the absence of a ricochet doesn't guarantee damage. The armor still needs to be penetrated.
Here, semi-armor piercing shells work like high explosive ones. Their penetrative capability is not affected by either distance, speed, or the penetration angle. A shell from Tier 10 Venezia pierces 54 millimeters of armor and less. I repeat, it happens regardless of the firing range and penetration angle.
After penetrating, the fuse immediately arms and the shell explodes directly behind the armor. Remember though that semi-armor piercing shells don't create an area of damage inflicted by shrapnel and a blast wave, i.e. the so-called high explosive cube that damages modules within it. There's no chance to cause fires either.
Now, let's consider a scenario that's impossible in the game but is very graphic nonetheless. Venezia fires at the side of Italian Tier 4 Alberto di Giussano. She has a 24mm thick armor belt and 20mm anti-torpedo bulkhead for her citadel. In total, 44mm of armor, 10 penetrations and 0 damage. The semi-armor piercing shells fired from Venezia would penetrate the armor belt and explode before reaching the citadel.
The armor belt and citadel are divided by an empty compartment. As a result, Alberto di Giussano remains undamaged. Of course, situations like this are rare, but it's important to remember that the new shells won't penetrate multi-layered armor. As compensation for this, there won't be any over-penetrations. Therefore, in some cases, semi-armor piercing shells surpass both armor piercing shells thanks to this peculiarity, and high explosive shells thanks to their better penetration capabilities.
Let's return to Minotaur. Now you know that semi-armor piercing shells from Venezia can't penetrate the 101mm of armor protecting her citadel. However, the British ship has only a small area of such armor at the center of her side and a little above the waterline. The rest of her armor is thin, perfect for the new Italian shells. A salvo at the forward end, 8 hits and over 8,800 damage scored. There's no need to look for vulnerable spots on destroyers though. Semi-armor piercing shells penetrate them easily, almost at any angle, and inflict impressive amounts of damage.
Do you think that fragile cruisers and destroyers are unworthy targets? Then remember the salvo at Yamato's bow at the beginning of this video. 7 hits and over 12,000 damage. That's serious enough, right? I think you might agree that not all Tier 10 cruisers can boast damage numbers like these when using high explosive or armor-piercing shells.
If your guns are loaded with semi-armor-piercing shells, fire at destroyers or aim for the thin armor of the superstructures and ends of well-protected ships. Knowing the advantages of different shell types and switching between them in good time is essential if you want to be efficient in battle. Remember that usual armor-piercing shells will be more effective in some situations.
If you still haven't watched the episodes of how it works about armor-piercing and high-explosive shells, we recommend doing so as soon as possible. Knowledge is power, Captains.
Hey!